this video, this is class number 2, and we're doing winter rivers and trees, and we're still working on the techniques page. And we did a sky with snow and masking fluid spritzed on. For the first one, we did sky with snow and then put salt on it after the watercolor was put on it. And then I did not finish mine, but I just got everybody to the point where they could see the different process of doing trees with masking fluid on a sponge. We put the masking fluid on the sponge on first, and you can see that in that first video, and then went back and painted over it. And by the way, I have a cold. Anyone out there that may know my voice, it's a little huskier right now.
Comes through my hearing aids.
And then the
anybody hear it?
deciduous tree.
I do. It's so frustrating.
The deciduous tree, we did just a couple of those, and then so now we're going to start with one that's doing background with trees that are going to have soft edges. They're going to be foggy type of looking trees, or maybe they're at a distance that you're not seeing hard edges, or it could be that maybe there's snow falling, and so it's giving some atmosphere, and the trees will have a fuzzy look to them. And I do have a sample. Okay. So, like this one right here, I think that'll show up, but basically so that you get the feel that there are trees. And it's a wet on wet process. And I'm going to start by getting some color out, because you want your color out and ready to go, and then wet your paper area, because if you wet the area and then put the color, get the color out, it can this can be drying over here, and then it doesn't work the same. I am using my number 10 brush. I don't want a really big brush right now, because the more paint and water your brush holds for this process, it can be a little trickier. Because we're using water on the paper, if you're using a medium to slightly small, I wouldn't use a teeny tiny brush necessarily. You could try this for this one because it's a smaller area. I'm going to use ultramarine. You can pull out a variety of colors, but basically I'm going to be making some variety of green. And because, let me actually pull this over, it's just viewable. Because we are doing trees that are in the distance, if they're sort of cooler greens, then they're going to feel a little more like they're in the distance. They could even be, this one kind of almost looks a little purple. Let me see, so I have ultramarine, I pulled out some aureolin yellow. I'm going to get out my New Gamboge, and even though that's a warm yellow, I'm going to be using it lightly enough, or lighter, that it won't be too warm looking. You could put a touch of burnt sienna in the mix if you wanted to tone it so that it's not too vibrant. I think I will get out a tiny bit of my Quin Magenta, which I haven't used a whole lot lately, but I still like to have it. Yeah, it makes a really good purple with ultramarine and cobalt, and actually with phthalo too. It does a good job. And I'll pull out just a touch of my burnt sienna in case I do want to tone the color I mix. All right, so you could use, instead of ultramarine, you might want to use cobalt. I don't know if I would use the turquoisier blues like phthalo or manganese. Cerulean's possible. It's a little on the, so if I pull out cerulean, it's on the a little more muted side of turquoise. It's not as vibrant. So I'll have that out just in case I decide I want to use it. So I've got just a variety. I may not end up using them all. I may end up mixing, so I have maybe 3 colors in a mix. All right, and then I'm going to use my clear water. And I'm just getting my brush really wet so it holds the water well. If you have a flat brush, you can do that. as well with the water. You would have to use a round, and it kind of makes it easier when you're doing a square or a rectangle to fill it in quickly. And then what I want is, I want it to be shiny but not dripping wet. And I will also be adjusting the moisture level on my brush. So because my board is tipped, I have it tipped on a block that's about 2 inches or so. That makes the moisture level move toward the bottom. And then I can take my brush, I dried it, and just using the slightly damp brush, you can wick up a little bit of that moisture if it's a little too wet, and it usually will run down toward the bottom. And then I want to pretty quickly come in and start making some of my mixes. So like this is the ultramarine and the aureolin, and I'm drying the back of my brush because I don't want it too wet. If you touch the paper, say if I had, I'm going to get it really wet over here for a second. If I touch the paper and it's really wet, I need it even wetter. It will just move really fast. And if it's moving really fast, that's where you either need to dry your brush a little more at the back edge, or not have as much water in your color over here, or give it just a few more seconds on the paper to dry just a little more. And I will be going back and forth. My brush is wetter now, and I did not dry the back edge. See how it made that big blob? So when it's drier, you can control how the edges in your trees. I'm going to make this tree go off the paper because it looked too big to be, because of that blob that I made. And then I'm going back and forth between colors. So it can be slightly, have a little variety within a tree. It doesn't have to be the same color throughout, just because it makes it more interesting. And then on that one handout, there's a variety of trees if you want to have something to look at to give yourself an idea of what that tree shape might be. I tend to I don't usually do that. Oops. Because it got too big for me pretty quick. But I tend to do things where, dry the back, where I sort of go upward to make the top of the tree and then come off of that shape. And this is still a little wet. It's moving a little wide. See how wide that got? I don't know if you can see it. Yeah. So it's not drying as quickly as I was thinking it might. So I can give it even a little more time. And I'll see if I can do one good one on this, because I don't have room to do more right now. I'm going to go back to the ultramarine and my new gamboge just to make it just a little greener. And dry the back of my brush. Let's see. Okay. The goal is, that's better, to try to, and leaving little spaces can make it feel like either there's snow falling or you don't want it too disconnected, but it's kind of nice to have those gaps in there. And then I can even go back and fill this one in just a little bit so it feels like they're next to each other. Okay, so only that blue corner up there is out of place, but yeah. So that is the general idea. And doing wet on wet can be a little tricky at first if you haven't done a lot of it, but doing just little practice things like this, you get a little more control. You figure out what you're needing to do for it. Let me go ahead and do this background sky on this one, and then I'll have you guys go down. So this one is going to be a tree with heavy snow, and I have my drawing on there. I'm going to go and draw it darker just so that everybody can sort of see where everything is. So I have a clump of snow there. I have a branch. Normally, like I say, I would not draw this darkly for doing my watercolors. And then I'm putting just where some pine needles will be coming up there. Maybe a branch is here. You can even have the branch come off. And then the pine needles. And then a clump of snow and some more pine needles. So that's the basic shape of it. And then I'm going to take, I think I'll use cerulean. Excuse me, need a drink. Okay, so I'm going to take cerulean, and you can do this wet on wet if you'd want to, if you had a bigger sky, but because this is actually, I think I will. It's going to make it easier. Because I'm going around some little shapes, having it be wet is going to give me more time to get around those shapes. So just using a brush, and you don't have to be too exact, but if you just basically get water pretty much around. And this is also one that you could mask those snow shapes. But because my pine needles are going to be darker than the sky, I am not worried about masking it, because if I masked the snow, then it would give me more time to get around everything. But I'm just going to paint right where the pine needles are and not worry about it. Okay, so I have cerulean out. If you wanted to use cobalt, you could. If you wanted to use sort of a blend of colors, you could. And if you want to play with the salt, you could also throw some salt on here as well. So my biggest thing for this is just getting around the snow, and I'm not worrying about the pine needles. Okay, coming up next to the branch and just kind of filling in.
And you did not wet the paper first?
I did.
Oh,
I
you did?
ended up, yeah.
Okay.
I did end
Okay.
up wetting. Okay. Just because it's giving me more time, because it's a very detailed little shape, it's easier to have the paper wet, because then you have more time. It kind of looks like it's snowed right there, so I'm leaving those, or is snowing. So it gives me more time to get around both sides of it. The other way you could do it is turn your board so that you're working from like this side and going around and then coming around and going that way. Yeah, but because I'm working down the paper, this is a good way to do it too. All right, so then just filling this in. So you can, if you wanted to, you could put some salt on there to give you that feeling of the snow falling. You could also let this sit for a few seconds and then spritz with a water bottle, and it will give you tiny little blooms. And we did not do that up above, but that would be another technique if you want to try it. It should not be flat. It needs just a touch of shine to it, but if it's really wet, that if you spritz with a water bottle, it's basically just going to cause a big puddle of water. So in order to get those little blooms, let me see if I can try this corner. Just to get an idea. And I have to, see how that's moved? I'll have to go revisit that in just a second. It was probably too wet. Yep, too early. Okay, yeah, I'm just going to end up with a big massive mess there now. What happened here is this was still wet enough that my color has moved too much. It just kind of blurred. It looks like a fast-moving car going past a forest now instead of, background trees. It is at the point where it has lost its shine. If I try to put any color on it now, it is going to be hard-edged. And my brush has to be hardly any moisture level on it. So I can dry the back edge just a little bit, but if I go back into this, it creates hard edges, even though it's still sort of wet. So in order to, if I wanted to adjust this, I would have to completely dry it, re-wet, and then try to put those trees back in again. So there is a fine line between it being too wet and everything moving. So yeah, if you notice that it's starting to get hard edges, then I would pause, maybe re-wet the square, and then paint. But if you're going to put it on and it's just flowing, then that's a little too early. So I will let you guys go work on yours, and then we'll come back and talk about this one. Okay, so this is ready to go. The background is dry, and where I spritzed with the water bottle didn't actually cause too much damage. It just kind of made this have a little more texture in it. Most of your blues have texture in them. Cerulean is one that does, and so not texture, but granulation.
Right. That was cerulean.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So when people say, "Oh, I really wanted this nice, clean, clear sky," you can't use
Cerulean.
ultramarine, you can't use cobalt, you can't use cerulean. When you do something wet and wet, that is going to increase the look of the granulation because it's like a surface, and then the heavier pigment or particles are going to drop, and then you'll see the color. So that actually exacerbates that feeling. But I kind of like the granulation. It doesn't bother me. I think if you're wanting a really smooth looking sky, just very flat, then you'd have to investigate blues and see if you can find one that doesn't have granulations.
And would hot press help versus cold press, or would it matter?
Not necessarily. Yeah, it's more in the pigment. It might a little bit because you don't have those hills and valleys, but it would be, you'd have to kind of test that. Yeah, I don't know that it would make a whole lot of difference. Yeah, acrylic. You could do a very flat in acrylic.
There you go.
Yep. And there are artists that do mix too, so they'll have watercolor and then some acrylic, and so yeah. Okay, so for this, I'm going to put on some pine needles and then the tree trunk. And I start with the pine needles because they're slightly lighter. Oh, actually, before I do that, I want to tone my snow, because if I just leave it like that, it's going to
Looks
look
like cotton.
just, yeah, it just looks flat. So in order to give the snow some shadow, I am going to, I think I'll stick with cerulean because I already have that color in my background. If you had some other blue in your sky, you could use that color. And then I'll probably just pull out a little bit of Quin Rose, and I can make kind of a pale purple. And I will use I probably, for this part, need to use my number 10 brush rather than my really small brush. Okay, so I have a little bit of a purple going, and it could be slightly pink, but I don't want it too on the red side. And then I'm going to use some water, and I will wet that shape, and I'm not worrying about where the pine needles are. I'm just going to wet all the way up into that shape. And then when I place the paint on there, I'm going to just paint or put the paint down in the area that I want to shadow, and maybe a little back from where it might move to. And then I'm going to dry the back of my brush just a little bit. And I probably could go, while that's drying, just a little bit, since it feels like maybe there's a little more humidity that's hard to say in Colorado's air, but might have just a little more in the air today because it seems to be taking a little longer to dry. Okay, so while that one's starting to dry, I'm going to place some shadow color. And if maybe my snow is getting lit from the left, if I wanted it to feel like the left or the right side is a little more in shadow, then I might go ahead and put more color there. You have to be careful again, because if it starts to move too much, you might end up with no light on your snow. And I'm going to dry this again because it is moving a little bit. And then I will go ahead and put some color on there. Watching that left side, if it starts to move too much, because that is moving pretty fast, I'm going to dry my brush and just come back in on the lit side and see if I can lift. You can also, and this is a little iffy, is my brush is a little wet right now, so if I put some water right there, it's going to push back and go the opposite way. It'll push the color back. But that can end up with a bloom edge, so you have to be careful if you do that. All right, so you can go and lift just a little bit if you need to. And that's not actually very dark. If I were going to do a darker shadow, I will do that for this. Now the other thing you could do is put your shadow down without putting any water on the paper. And I would show you that, but I've already started this. Here, I'll show you here. This is my shape. I could put my shadow on the paper let it dry, and then come back and soften that outside edge. You can, if it's not really wet, like this is not very wet right now, so I could take some clear water, and as long as my brush is not really wet, I can go in and soften the edge very carefully right now, as long as I come out from that shape just a little bit with the moisture. Then I can soften the edge, and it will keep it where I've put the paint, but give you that softer edge. So now this hopefully is dry enough, now that I've messed with that other one, that it won't move as much as these did. And I'm going to make the color darker this time, so that it will have a more sunlit. By putting darker shadows in, it will feel even more sunlit. Yep. It is starting to dry. It's a little wet there, but it's drying down here. So I'm going to do what I did here and come in with a little clear water. And you just want to make sure your brush is just damp. And then if this were really wet, if it were lots of water in there, I would wait till most of the shine was gone before I would do that. And that allows you to control how you're applying and where it's moving to. I'm going to put a little more color in these now. See, this is still slightly damp because it's getting a soft edge, and I can darken that shadow. I bet you this is still, nope, okay. No, I was wrong. I would have lost that bet. All right. And I'm going to take a little bit of water and soften there as well. All right, so now I need to dry that, and then I can do the pine needles. So I'm going to grab the blow dryer. I probably have told all you guys this before, but normally when I'm working with paint in on my own, I am not using a blow dryer, except for I will give it time to lose its shine, and then I might dry it if I wanted to move on to something. If you dry it too quickly, what can happen is it can kind of flatten the color. And I was actually reading in that one small book that I was showing you guys, he was mentioning if you dry it too quickly, it can lighten the color, which I'm not positive about. I have to check into that, so I don't know, but
Maybe the old paint.
maybe,
Yeah.
maybe that could make a difference. Yeah.
Different.
Although they
Yeah.
seem to have used more pure products earlier than they do now.
Could-
So,
yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Different what the binder was then too.
yeah, that might have.
Yeah.
That changed.
Yeah, or other chemicals or things in it. So,
Thrift store.
okay. So I'm going to pull out ultramarine,
This is cool.
and I have my new gamboge out. You can use other mixes, but I think it works well for pine needles. And then it's just bringing
Yeah.
the pine needles up and around, and you can vary the colors just a little bit so that they're not all the same color. And then it depends on, you might even have a few pine needles sticking kind of randomly out of the snow. That wouldn't, well, yeah, if there were a branch coming up, that would make sense. I was like, that wouldn't really make sense, but it would work. And my paint over here is so dry that I'm having a hard time getting it off the palette. Because the pigment that I'm using right now is darker, and because the sky was lighter, that's why I can, I knew I would be able to go over it. If it were a color that, because they're next to each other on the color wheel, if I had, maybe I had a sunset sky, and then I was going to want a bright green in front of that, then I might protect those pine needles. If it was something where the pine needles could be more neutral, then I wouldn't worry about it maybe so much. I'm going to dry this, and then I can put the trunk in.
That really made it come alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those needles.
Yeah, and it's also that contrast of the value that makes a difference. So, all right, so then to put the tree trunk in, because my light's coming from the left, I'm going to be thinking about that as I'm putting the color on. So in order to make it feel like it's got some sun on it, I'm using burnt sienna, and I'll use it straight to begin on the left side. And because this is a small trunk, I'm not going to pre-wet anything. and maybe a touch there, and maybe there's a little bit down there. And before that dries, I'm going to quickly go get some ultramarine with the burnt sienna and come up right next to the burnt sienna so that it will blend just a little bit. And bring it down here. My trunk got a little out of control. It got real wide at the bottom. And then this, I'm imagining this branch is going to be more in shadow. So have a piece of the branch come out from the tree if you want. Maybe, like I suggested, maybe there's a branch that comes up here or something, just plain. So, yeah, it's a minor little, it would be sort of a Charlie Brown tree because it's just the top of a little tree. And, but this is the same similar idea that you can use on bigger trees when you're doing big clumps of snow that do happen. So I'll let you guys go do that, and then I'll have you come back up to do the next one. Margaret's, and just some river things. We were talking in the handout about how a lighter object can create a darker shadow, and so this reflection down here is from the snow, but it's definitely more gray and darker than the snow itself.
Yeah.
And then we can't, well, yeah, I can compare maybe. It's probably hard to see on there, but the trees, the aspen tree trunks are lighter here and darker down here. So it's that reverse of what the object is. And this is definitely in shadow. If I were to do this, I might bring some light into the top edges of the snow somewhere, or maybe a little bit of light, just so that there's a little more going on. But I love
He said it was almost the sunset.
Okay.
And this is
It's almost
Ditch
sunset.
Trail. I've done it 100 times. It's
Cool.
in Aspen.
It looks like a nice place to walk.
It's a great
So this one is a lot of light on the snow, and then there's some reflections, shadows back in here. The river is kind of neutral in color, but it does have some blues, so it's sort of a gray-brown with a little bit of blue and a little bit of
sky,
snow. Yeah. And then this is same area, it looks like, and you can see more of the snow reflection. There's a little bit of variety going on in the water because there's where the shadows are from up above and where light is hitting, so you're getting a little more happening, but I love the undulation
I love the
of
composition.
snow.
I told him that was a good composition.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then the one thing I think here,
Yeah,
Margaret and I
that
talked about
doesn't
is that
look
tree would probably
Yeah.
either be pulled up straight or go.
Just gone.
Yeah, so that's
It
always,
does draw your eye.
and that is always
in
something that,
opposition to the.
yes. And it's, take the picture, but then just know as an artist, you can move things. You
Move
can take
things
things out, put things in,
Yeah.
change things. So don't feel like you can't adjust. This one is darker water, and you can see some of the rocks because of how you're probably on the bridge, or he is on the bridge here, I think. So yeah, you can see some of the rocks under, but there's,
You can see tracks too.
oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
there's some nice tracks right
Almost
there.
all streams
Oh,
have
neat.
tracks.
Yeah.
That makes it even more interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
A fox
that's
probably.
something too to think about is different angles, whether you're closer down to the water or up on a bridge, or that can make the view interesting. So, and this is probably, it looks like almost the same image, but he's just got a
He
wider.
was off the bridge.
Oh, was he?
and looking
Okay.
further
Just call him and tell him.
horizontal.
Okay.
He was up looking down on the first top one, and this one he's down.
Oh yeah, because there's
looking-
less of the foreground water, and he's got more the background going on. So.
I just thought the snow patterns
That's
were pretty
really
impressive.
Yeah, this is really interesting. And you could even crop down, maybe just taking, if you didn't want to deal with architecture or the feeling of humans or something, you could have something like that as an image too. Maybe bring it over here so there's a little more snow in there. But, so that is something to think about as well when you're looking at your images, is to think about cropping.
Yeah.
Because you might just want a little section of something rather than the whole big scene. And it would, or you could do 3 or 4 things from one photo. This one's cool because I like the
Nice.
aspen.
That's really nice.
I would probably take this branch and either take it out or make it small right in here. You could just make a small bush right there, but yeah, that's really
pretty.
nice.
That's a pretty
That's
light on.
lovely.
And I think because there is an aspen here, he's actually got framing going
Yeah,
on,
yeah.
but there's no light on this one.
No.
So I would maybe
I would
move
take
it
that one
in
out.
Yeah.
or take it out.
Doesn't do any good.
Well, the one thing it does do is it frames in here. So if you moved it in just a little bit and put some light on
Light
it,
on it.
then it would feel it's got the 2
Yeah.
and the 1, so it's a nice balance.
Yeah, I don't know why that is so bright and the other is so black. It's
It just may be that this
Being
one
a
was
shadow
shadowed
of
by
something
something.
else.
Yeah, yeah.
oh well.
That's
So,
lovely.
But yeah, that's nice.
That's my favorite.
And then this one has got
That's interesting.
yeah, this one is a little more overhead still, so you can see down into the water
Rocks.
and the rocks, and I like those openings in the river or in the snow to see the river.
Yeah, it looks like the snow broke off,
Uh-huh.
sharp
Doesn't it?
edges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
This one has got more action in the water, so this would be dealing with
Pretty.
the movement of the water.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one has a nice feel because it's curving,
Yeah.
and you've
And
got
some
some
aspens there.
height. Yep.
Some shadows.
Yeah, I like
That
that one.
bank over there is really cool too.
Pretty
Yeah,
shadows.
that is really
Yeah.
nice.
So
I don't
when-
know so much about this one shooting out from a
right
corner.
here. I think if you cut, I think it's interesting because it's a diagonal, but you might adjust
Yeah.
something about it because it feels, right now it's right into the corner.
Yeah.
And it's
So-
that shadow too that follows it exactly.
Yeah, so you
Points,
might
and
look
it's,
at,
it's cut off at the end.
It almost looks
Yes.
better without it.
yeah, you could take it out
Yeah.
too, but yeah, I would look at that because maybe it could be there, but just at a different angle, but
Neat.
yeah. And last one, this one is all right, but it's mostly dark,
Yeah.
and
Getting late again.
yeah. So, and there's some distortion in the colors because of the reflections down here from the light. It looks purple around the edges, and so unless you want to push your images to have some unusual colors to them, I would think if I was going to paint this, I wouldn't put the purple around the edges of the,
Could be my
of the
printer.
reflections. It could be what?
Could be my printer.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is printers print things differently, so.
I don't have those with the ice all the way over the water, the teal color.
Yeah, that wasn't in there. So Margaret has a picture on her phone where the ice is covering the water and it looks like it's turquoisey because of it's a sunny day, and yeah, it was a really nice color scheme. So these guys are small. If you want to make it more about the river, less about the other things in the scene, you're welcome to adjust how I've drawn them. So basically what I did was I drew sort of some snow mounds, and I'm just going back over them so they can be seen. And this top part is going to be a gray sky. The sky will make a difference on what happens with your water. So if your sky is gray, generally your water is going to be gray. Oh, nice. Let's see if that will show.
Is that yours?
No,
Yeah.
it may not show a whole lot on the video, but basically it's
It's
sort of
ice over the
turquoisey.
whole water.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
turns it.
So I'll pass this so you guys can see.
Wow, that's pretty.
But it's got a really pretty feel to the color.
Oh, wow.
That is nice.
Yeah, that
Yeah, you
almost
definitely
looks like a roaring
turquoisey.
fork.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Alaska and the glaciers.
Oh,
Yeah, it
yeah.
does. That's
Yes.
the same color.
Yeah, because the glaciers will often have
That's
the
lovely, especially with
turquoise.
the
Yep.
difference with the white
Yeah, our
trees.
Glacier National
Nice.
Park.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Beauty.
I like that. I think
So-
I might keep it.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
And I have his copyright, of course.
Your son's,
Because I
yes.
gave birth to him. I
That's
should
right.
get something out of it.
Okay, so I'm going to use cobalt and some burnt sienna to make gray. If you have another gray, you can use that. But basically, I just want to kind of make it look like a gray sky. And it's, I think it's the same mix I used for this top sky up here. I do not have mask on this, but this would also be one that if you wanted to make it look like it's snowing, you could use a toothbrush with some masking fluid. And I am pre-wetting the sky just so that I can, if I want to have some clouds in there, I can do that easily. And then I'm going to use, and I'm going pretty quick here because I want to get this done so you guys can go paint. And then as I'm coming down toward the snow area, that's where I want to come up next to the edge, because I want to make sure that my snow is going to look lighter than the sky.
So you didn't wet that first?
I did.
You did,
I did go
okay.
in and wet it, yes.
Just the top?
Yeah.
Okay, just.
And then for the river, I'm not wetting where the snow is, but for the river, because it's going to be moving and because the sky has got some softer edges to it and I don't have any trees in this one that would have harder edges, I'm going to go ahead and wet it as well.
Okay.
And there is a gap on mine where there is snow in between the river and the sky, so I don't have to worry. Actually, I have a hard edge happening here because I probably didn't catch that with the water. Okay. Because I have a gap, I don't have to worry if I go ahead and wet this right now. And so I'm just using some clear water. And I want to, if I can, make this feel like it has some ice in the river. So that would be probably hard-edged. Now that I'm thinking about it, probably if I wanted to have the ice, I'm going to skip the ice look on this one because I'll just leave lighter areas, like it's got some clouds reflecting in it. But if I wanted ice, it would have those harder edges, and so then I would paint it on dry paper because otherwise it's not going to do that for me. And I think I'm actually I went and got a little bit of my cobalt and maybe a touch of, I'm going to get a little bit of manganese. I'm going to clean my brush. So this has got gray on it with just a touch of white. I'm actually going to use a touch of my manganese just because it's fun to try. I'm drying the edge, and this is called charging in color. And just putting a little bit around the edges where the snow might be reflecting sort of down into the water will make the river have a little more interest to it. And so when I go to put the color on the snow, then that can sort of be seen as, oh, it's reflecting down into the water a little bit.
I'm sorry that I missed what colors you used for the sky.
For the sky, I used
Cerulean.
cobalt
Oh,
and burnt
cobalt.
sienna.
Okay.
And then I used those same colors for the water, the river. And then once that was on there, and I did leave a few little openings where there's a little bit of white, I went and got straight cerulean
Okay.
and put just a dab while that was still wet. Put a little bit of
Thought you said
cerulean.
manganese.
She did.
Did I say
You
manganese?
said
I meant cerulean, sorry. Yeah. I didn't, don't do what I say, do as I do, right? Don't even do as I do sometimes. So I'm going to dry this and put a little color on the snow, and then I'll have you guys go work on yours. Okay, so because this is a gray day, there's not going to be a really strong sunlit feel to it. I'm actually going to dab water on because I want it to have hard and soft edges. I don't want it to have a really hard edge because if it does for a shadow, it will look like it's more of a sunlit feel or that there's something close to it causing that shadow. And because I don't have any trees in this scene, I'm just going to make it have kind of softer edges. Before I put that on though, I'm going to pull out, I'm going to use cobalt and my warm red. So my warm red is Perol Scarlet, and it is like Cad Red, but it is not opaque. It is semi-transparent, and it is a single pigment. So
What's
that's
the name
why
of which one?
Perol Scarlet. But if you don't have Perol Scarlet, you can use Cad Red. You can use Vermilion. It'll give you a slightly different color, but basically what I'm wanting is a purple that is kind of muted. And because I'm using a warm red with my blue, it's going to give me a more muted purple. So this is the resulting mix, or you can use a little more red in it to get slightly redder in that mix. All right, and then I'm going to take my other brush with a little clear water, and I'm not wetting the whole thing. I'm just kind of dabbing on some water, and I'm not too worried about where I'm putting it, but then I know when I go to put my color for the shadow on there, it will hit the water and it will move, it will cause soft edges here and there, and I will have both hard and soft. And if it's not quite, like I have a little line there, there's no tree to create that line, so I'm going to go a little bluer because I don't want it too red. And then maybe I'll I'm kind of following what I would imagine the lay of the land is, because my back hill is pretty dramatically curved, so I want to make it feel like there are other, add a little more water in places. I wanted to make it feel like there are curves on the snow, and maybe some right up here in this corner. Make that corner kind of disappear a little bit. And I'll use just a little water in a couple places. And then probably won't do much more than that. And then same thing over here, I'm wetting it. And you might have a different way that you want to describe the snow. This is just a method that you can use, so don't feel like you have to use this method exactly, but it's one that can be used. Okay. And again, I'm going to make that white corner sort of disappear because they grab attention, and I don't want the attention in the corners. And then I'm just going to use a little water on some of those edges where it didn't quite catch water, just so that it's a little softer feeling. And because my gray of my water dried and now it's pretty similar to the color I just put on, that actually needs to go darker.
The water?
The water needs to go darker. On some of it, and maybe not all of it. Let me dry. So I am not going to wet it this time. I went back over to get my gray, which is the cobalt and burnt sienna. And now actually I can kind of go around some of those lighter shapes if I want to. And I'm basically making lines that sort of make it look like the water's moving, and leaving some of those lighter areas. So that helps separate it. And also, just even if all I had done, let me get some color. If all I had done was put a shadow like right here, and one right here at the edge of the snow, that can make it feel like it's
That's
separate.
good, yeah.
Yep,
That's
and
good,
separated from the
yeah.
water. Yeah.
That's good.
And then I think I'm going to use a little bit of the cerulean again, right around where the snow might be reflecting, although I don't really have any blue up here. I'm playing now. Gotta play, right? All right. And just a touch more over here. So I would say for this, it's basically using kind of muted tones, and then just trying the, doing the, a little bit of water, maybe not wetting the whole thing. You can play with that, what works. And then you may have to go back, and generally with watercolors, I'm doing layers. So I'm doing maybe 6 to 10 to 15 layers on something in order to make it work. So you can sometimes put it down and it's exactly right, and then other times you have to come back and play, or add layers. Maybe not play, but add layers. All right, so I will have you guys go work on this one. We've got still about an hour. So depending on where everybody gets on this one, then I may have you come back and we'll do this other one. Really what I'm wanting to focus on this one is not necessarily the water, but I wanted to do some reflections from the trees. Maybe I'll do it. Yeah, I'll have you come back. That way we'll focus on one. So we'll do this one, and then I'll have you come back and we'll do some silhouettes and some reflections. For this scene, I am going to do a kind of a blue-ish sky. I'm not working from anything, so I'm just kind of making it up. But basically what I wanted to do is put enough information on there that I could show you some trees that we will be doing as silhouettes, and just give you an idea for doing that. So I'm just going to use the cerulean since I already have it out. Seems to be the color for me today for the sky. And then I'll use a little bit of clear water again. If you wanted a straight blue sky, you could just paint the cerulean on. This is a small enough square that it wouldn't take much just to paint the color on there, but I'm going to put clouds in, so. And maybe I'll have a dramatic cloud with some angle to it. Right there. Okay. And I'll let that dry. And then again, I have a gap where my snow separates the river from the sky, so I can go ahead and put some water on the water. Okay, so I'll put that in, and then I'm going to use a little bit of two colors. So I will start with the cerulean and bring it kind of around and make that cloud sort of appear in the water. And then because I want this to feel like there's maybe some rocks in there or something like that, I'm going to use some of my burnt sienna and ultramarine to make sort of a gray, maybe brown gray. And then just in a couple places, put some color in the water just to make it a little more dramatic. But again, since I'm not working from a photo, you know, you can kind of make it up how you want it to be for this one. I'm going to dry that, and then I'll show you the tree silhouettes. If you are doing something like this all the time, you start to get an idea of, like, this is the look of tree I want, this is maybe how the river will look. So even if you're working with something where you don't have a complete image, you can usually put it in without too much effort. But sometimes it takes doing this kind of scene a lot. So what I'm going to do for this one, and this is not necessarily the colors we will be using, I'm giving no hints for what we will be doing for our actual painting. This is just to get the silhouette so you can see that. I think instead of brown or gray, I'm going to use my ultramarine blue with my warm red and make a dark purpley color. So this time, I think that shows up there, I will want more of my warm red, but I also want a lot more of my ultramarine, because I don't necessarily want it to be red or burgundy. I want it to be purpley, a deep purpley color. So you will want more ultramarine than you have of the red for sure. And
Is
this
that
may
pearl scarlet?
yes. And so I'm using a small brush because this is a very small scene, and I'm going to just pull over one of the black and white copies of my tree silhouettes. And to do these guys, I'm going to actually make this first tree taller than what is on my scene, because these guys are so small. I want to make a tree big enough so you guys can see it. So I'm ignoring where my actual scene is. And maybe I'll go ahead and make it bigger so you guys can see it. So when I'm doing these, I have on my paper, I have a pencil line. On the drawing that we're doing for the actual painting, I made those marks to give you guys an idea of, well, this is the shape of the branches. But if you're making a silhouetted tree, or you're just making a tree, you can come in with a small brush like this, and as long as you do these trees enough and you practice the marks, you can make this sort of tree without having to put any branches on there. This does help because it sort of gives me an idea. Well, it's a little shorter on that side right there, and then maybe right under it there's a bigger branch. So it can give you an idea. And basically what it is, I'll do a bigger one with this, is taking, it does, yeah, it becomes scribbly. And I am making, as I'm doing, if this were my bigger, I just keep enlarging it. Okay, so I usually put some kind of a top to it because the trees usually have a small little top and maybe a few branches. And then bringing it out and just a few little pieces that come out from that initial mark. And then you might have just a little piece that comes off of the tree, Or you might have a bigger shape that really fills in depending on that particular tree and the thickness of the foliage. Then you might notice the trunk again, and then there might be a couple branches down below that, or there might be an area where you have a branch on one side and not on both sides. So having some variety to the tree trunk and the marks that you're making will make it more interesting and make it feel more realistic. So as you're doing these guys, you can, if you wanted to make your square bigger, I would just use little brush, and basically because these are such small trees, you won't need a whole lot of movement. I'm not really moving my hand a lot. It's more just sort of like Margaret said, just sort of scribbling right in here. And then maybe a tree trunk and then some branches and all of that. And I'll bring this one down. Let's see. And then the bottoms of these trees are just tall. They don't have any branches. You could, every now and then, you might see a branch, actually, without the foliage or the needles. So then, because this is a silhouette, the light would be coming from behind. So if I were going to put a shadow on here, and I'll just use the same ultramarine and burnt sienna, pearl, my shadow would be kind of on this side in the snow. And it may not be narrow, it might be, and then in the water, my shadow should be just a little, or the reflection, not the shadow, should be a little away from the shore because my snow would be reflecting right in there. And then it might be broken, or it might be all one line connecting it. You might even see some of the foliage that's higher up on something, some part of it. And so it's just making those little, usually sort of broken zigzaggy lines. And if your tree is a narrower trunk, it's not going to be really wide, so you just kind of look at your tree. Generally, because of where this is and how close it is to the water, I'm going to be seeing the trunk first, and then the foliage part of this tree would be, if this were water right here, it would be up in here somewhere. If the tree's farther back, you're probably going to see some of the foliage, maybe not the trunk. So you just have to be aware of how close or far it is from it. But just putting that in there gives that surface of the water the feeling of reflection. And so I would put in those trees and then kind of place some reflections in the water. The other thing that you can do, which you can see, and I'll give you guys this black and white copy, is that the snow is reflecting down into the water, and it is darker for sure. So I would maybe come in with a darker shape right in there below the snow so that it feels like it's got some reflection. And I haven't put any color on the snow. You could do the same kind of thing that's here if you want to with lighter. One of the things, if you're doing snow and you want it to look sort of rounded, is just wetting up in there. And I'm using cerulean on my brush. I can just sort of let it touch up where I put the water and just kind of give it some shadowing. So, but I don't want to take a whole lot of time because I want you guys, it's a little close. But I'll let you guys go get started, and then we will start the, we will do a small color study and talk about colors next week and actually start the painting next week. So if you can bring either the rest of this paper to do a small color study, we'll start with that, and it will be very quick. In fact, I will show you mine, and then if you want to pre-draw yours, you can, but I am actually going to, where the heck is it? I am actually going to draw mine next week so that you can see that I'm just going to do it quickly. I'm not trying to take a lot of my color study. Yes, so this is my color study. And so it is small. It's maybe 3 by 2 or 2.5 by 3.5, something like that. So if you want to pre-draw it, just so that you don't have to think about that during class, you can. But I'm going to draw mine quickly while I'm sitting here so that you can see it doesn't have to be very detailed. It can be quick, or you can just wait and see what I do. And then we will talk about colors, and I'll tell you then what I have used, and then we will start on the sky of the big painting. So that's where we'll start. We'll see where we get next week. And this one actually, this painting may not take too long, so we might be able to finish it at the 4th class and then start either your own, or if you don't have your own and you want another image from me, I can have another image available. So if you want to start your own, but yeah, so the plan is we'll start this scene next week, and we'll start with the color study. So I'll give you guys the black and white version so you have the values and you can see it for this image, and we'll go from there next week.